Hello, this is the World of the 20th Century podcast, and I'm your professor, Adam Holt. History. Lesson 1. Chapter 7. The formation of the bipolar world in the Truman-Stalin era. This chapter explains the outbreak of the Cold War, emerging from the final days of World War II. The seeds of the Cold War were sown in Europe. Allies during the war, the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States, along with France, occupied Germany following the German surrender. A major difference between the post-war settlements of World War I and of World War II was that following the First World War, there was an international peace conference convened in Paris, where a wide-ranging post-war settlement, including boundary changes and war reparations, were hammered out. While many nations of the world were at Paris, it was really the Big Four of the USA, Britain, France, and Italy who made the decisions. After World War II, however, there was no similar world peace conference. The Allies, America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, made the decisions as the questions arose over a period of time, such as at the conferences at Yalta and Potsdam. These former World War II allies had competing visions for a post-war Europe, particularly over the future of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union, which had suffered the most losses during World War II, with some 27 million dead, was bent on securing a buffer zone between it and Germany, a zone over which it would have control and would protect it from future invasion. The United States wanted these Eastern European nations to freely and openly choose their governments, but this would not lead to Communist Party candidates being elected, so the Soviets were instrumental in steering Communist candidates into power through Popular Front tactics and violence. This extension of Soviet power and influences westward into Eastern Europe would lead Winston Churchill to remark that an iron curtain had descended upon and dividing Europe. Within 2 years of the end of the Second World War, the United States had made a significant policy statement concerning the Soviet Union and the potential spread of communism around the world. In March 1947, President Truman announced money and military support for Greece and Turkey, then facing a communist threat. This Truman Doctrine established the American policy of containment, that the spread of communism around the world had to be contained. One must remember that following World War II, communism was attractive to nations for a variety of reasons. For one, it did not cause the worldwide economic depression during the 1920s and 30s, which allowed extremist and authoritarian leaders such as Hitler to come to power. For another, in many countries invaded by the Nazis during World War II, it was communist guerrilla forces who offered great resistance, who refused to collaborate with the invader. Thus, communism came out of World War II with some moral authority. While the Truman Doctrine, in a sense, drew a line in the sand, the European Recovery Program, or the Marshall Plan, sought to finance the rebuilding of Europe from the devastations of World War II. Initially, the money was available for all European countries to access, including the Soviet Union, who showed some initial interest but quickly backed away and forbade its Eastern European satellite states from participating in it, when it became clear that U.S. bankers lending the money would need some oversight of the funds in the USSR, including access to the government financial books. This the USSR would not allow, on principle, and because it likely did not want the United States to know how poorly off the Russians really were after World War II. The Marshall Plan did what it intended to do, however, and got Europe back on its feet, and, not coincidentally, spurred the U.S. economy as orders poured in from Europe for American goods. Germany itself became a contentious issue between East and West. At the end of the war, Soviet troops entered Germany from the east, and British and American troops from the west. When the war was over, the USSR, USA, Britain, and France were the occupying powers, each controlling a section of the country and with joint supervision of the capital, Berlin. A fact of geography, however, significantly soured relations, as Berlin was jointly governed, but was physically located well within the Soviet-controlled area of eastern Germany. The Soviet Union was bent on derailing unification from among the four occupying sections, and the most vulnerable spot was Berlin, accessible from the west of Germany only by certain rail lines and highways, which the Soviets abruptly closed in June 1948. This necessitated a great logistical program to feed Berliners and became known as the Berlin Airlift. The airlift was also significant because it accelerated U.S. involvement in Europe. Cold War alignments became clearer in 1949. In that year, the division of Germany became permanent as the British, French, and American sectors unified into one state, the German Federal Republic, or Western Germany, and the Soviets responded the following month by declaring the German Democratic Republic, or referred to as East Germany. Also in 1949, the Truman administration established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a military alliance aimed against the USSR. The creation of NATO forced the Soviets to drastically increase the size of its army in Europe to outnumber NATO forces, and it also spurred the Soviets to develop competing, devastating bombs. In 1955, the Soviets established their own military alliance, the Warsaw Pact.